Today we take media technology quite for granted. There are MP3 players, cell phones, iPods, satellite radios, high definition, TiVo, Blu-ray, and we look forward to what's next. But to really appreciate how far we have come, let's step back for a moment to the very beginning. It all started right here. After World War I, the government decided to allow radio, which to that point had been a military communications tool, to be used commercially in order to communicate with the general public. This government-owned resource, spectrum, more commonly known as the airwaves, is the platform on which broadcasting and wireless communications industries are built. Now, in those early days, as technology progressed, it became possible for moving images as well as voice to be transmitted over the airwaves, creating what we now take for granted as radio and television networks as well as the film and record industries. But let's not skip over an essential factor. Each spectrum-based industry created wealth and power for those licensed by the government to use spectrum for doing business. Now let's be clear. The rules that determined who would be given the privilege of using the government spectrum for commercial purposes were formulated at a time when blacks were purposefully denied economic participation at all levels of American society by racism, Jim Crow laws, public and private policies, as well as the legacies of slavery and its structural socioeconomic inequalities. As a result, the broadcast industry began with 100% of the broadcast opportunities set aside for whites only. Now how's that for affirmative action? By the late 1930s, 26 million American households owned at least one radio. On average, American families spent 5 hours a day listening to their radio. Without question, radio was America and indeed the world's primary source of information and ideas. The voice on the radio interpreted and explained the events of the day and established what was generally accepted as American reality. On those rare occasions when blacks were included in the programming, they were cast as simple childlike buffoons, an illusion white Americans felt necessary to promote. Currently, blacks own less than 2% of the nation's broadcast licenses, and from their entrance into the communications industry, blacks have had to compete with structural inequalities that have historically given whites an advantage based on their race. And it was Bill Clinton's 1990 deregulation bill that dealt one of the most severe blows to black radio.
I mean, what it really did was it was almost like the death knell of black radio. So it meant Clear Channel, it meant all of these could come in and just buy up, like, huge numbers of stations. And when they bought up huge numbers of stations, it meant the homogenization. I mean, in other words, all of a sudden now, local programming, local news, local input, a lot of that stuff got wiped out completely, and you just had, like a homogenized format.
At one point, the U.S. Census Bureau reported that of 10,315 commercial AM and FM radio stations in the United States, blacks owned only 168, and even that number is declining. The Census Bureau and the FCC no longer count black ownership. Instead, they use the broad, ambiguous term minority so that the number of black owners becomes obscured. At the beginning, all radio stations that offered programs for the black community were white-owned, and most of those early white owners had no real commitment to the black community. Their radio stations served as giant supermarkets, selling shoddy products to black consumers. These early stations offered very little news and information and placed the overwhelming emphasis on entertainment. In fact, they sound very much like today's black music stations.
The companies that own black radio, be they black or white, have not seen fit to deal with people that have a radio background. So therefore we have entertainers that told jokes that are now trying to impart, in this time of extreme jeopardy to black people, trying to impart knowledge that is always backed up by some buffoonery.
What's on radio today, in my estimation and in my belief, is propaganda to dumb down our children. It's repetitious. You hear the same songs by the same artists you hear songs that you know are not the best that's out there, but it's been selected by the powers that be. So I feel that what we're hearing on radio now is really just cheating people.
Now, to put it all in context, let's go back to those early days for a moment. Blacks may have entered radio as the impoverished offsprings of racism and exploitation, but there was nothing impoverished about the spirit and self-image of those black men who found their way into an industry that was to become a broadcast phenomenon, which was at that time unique to America: black radio. It was 1949 when WERD in Atlanta went on the air as the nation's first black-owned radio station, when Jesse B. Blayton, a black bank president and professor at Atlanta University, bought the station for $50,000. And it was the legendary jockey Jack Gibson, who became renowned as Jack the Rapper, who was the first voice in America to be broadcast on a black-owned radio station. He spoke to Atlanta and indeed to history when he said, "Hello America, we're here." Black-owned radio was now a reality. WERD was followed in a matter of weeks by KPRS in Kansas City, owned by the Carter family, as the second black-owned station in the nation. KPRS is still owned by the Carter family, and both KPRS AM and FM are still on the air. It was indeed black radio that gave birth to real personality radio. In fact, blues legend B.B. King began his career as a disc jockey on WDIA in Memphis, Tennessee.
The soul personalities had more of a flair. They were hipper, they were sharper, they had their pulse on not only their audience but the community, as opposed to pop radio where the guys just showed up and did whatever they were supposed to do. Soul radio took chances on artists, took chances on music. Pop stations never did.
First of all, the black audience, black people love music. So here you had radio stations that were programming the music that black people liked. But besides that, you had these extraordinary personalities. You had characters. They were unique individuals, each one of them. They had their own sound, they had their own personas, and they were articulate, which made them appear also to be extremely intelligent. And they were black. They were black in terms of their personas, they were black in terms of their identification with the community, the issues and ideas and problems of the community. And so they created excitement. You know, they created a feeling of identification that the black community would turn to their radio station. And that personality became, you know, like their representative of not just the music, but the culture.
There's one personality who is not necessarily acknowledged, perhaps, as much as he should be. His name is Al Benson. And what Al Benson would do is he would actually use his show as a platform to connect family members with each other, so that if a family member was trying to get in touch with another family member because they just came up from Mississippi and they just, you know, rolled into Chicago and they can't find that particular family member, Al Benson would go on the air and actually present that person's name and say, you know, your cousin such and such is in town, blah, 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 trying to find you, blank, blank. And so he's networking, almost like an on-air Facebook, you know, kind of piece that he was doing at the time. And at the same time that he was doing this, what he did was he spoke in a vernacular that was familiar to the folks, not only in Chicago, but the folks who were coming in from the South, kind of Ebonics orientation. So what occurred was that he was one of the people. So I would say probably because he became so big and because he was in a place like Chicago, Al Benson would be one of the first people that I would identify in this particular realm. Right along with Al Benson would be someone who more familiar to more people, it would be Hal Jackson. I think those two stand at a pivotal level on the very early phasing of black radio personalities.
Again, it is helpful to go back to the beginning.
Dave Clark used to sit me down and tell me some stories. The one I like best is WLLE in Raleigh, North Carolina. Had a guy used to clean up named Willie. And Willie's job was coming every morning, straighten out the station and so forth. And this particular morning, he came in, the morning man didn't come to work. And Willie knew that at 6 a.m., that music was supposed to start playing. So 6:05, he wasn't there. They said, Willie took a record and put it on the turntable and took the mic and said, because he knew how to work all that, he said, you know, this white boy is supposed to be here playing these records, and he ain't here. But I know these records are supposed to get played, so I'm just going to put one on. I'm just sweeping to clean it up. I'll be back if you don't come back. So he played the record. About 10 minutes later, he heard the record. It was off, and Willie came back and said, he still ain't come to work, so I'm going to put another record on for y'all to keep on cleaning up. Well, what happened is people who were listening to the morning show was so tickled with Willie that they started calling the station. And the station found out that they liked Willie. So they hired Willie. Willie became from the janitor. I think he still became the janitor too. But he became the morning man too. And they called him Sweeping Willie. So now from there you got Chatty Hattie, Dixie Drifters, Satellite Poppers, and Dr. Jive. There were 12 of them all over the place. See, that's how all that started.
Okie Dokie Smith was from Laura, Mississippi. He was the first recognized black voice we as teenagers in suburbs of New Orleans recognized as the black man on the radio. I tell you how influential he was. When he came on the radio in 1951, he came on for Maxwell House Coffee. And he would come on, I think he didn't do a half hour. He did about 20 minutes. And he would come on, Lordy, Miss Claudie, eat your mother's homemade pies and drink Maxwell House coffee. Well, me as a kid, trying to learn how to be a musician, I didn't know exactly which direction that was going to take me. But when I heard Lordy, Miss Claudie, I dreamt it. It was like the kids now is stuck on rap. I was hooked on Lordy, Miss Claudie and Okie Dokie Smith.
Oh, now, Lordy, 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 Miss Claudie, girl, you sure look good to me. Well, please don't excite me, baby. No, it can't be me.
As it evolves, and people like Jack the Rapper come into this equation at the same time with them, but as that picture evolves, you begin to get your Dr. Jive, your Dr. Jive Tommy Smalls at WWRL, where you're seeing a DJ who's on a small 5,000 watt radio station who's competing with forces like Alan Freed, who's on a 50,000 watt station at the time, and where somehow we see Dr. Jive able to create competing shows using the thing that we talked about a few moments ago, that being the power of the music. So that Dr. Jive, Tommy Smalls, understood that even though he was on a 5,000 watt radio station, that the music that he was actually playing had the power and the potential to actually compete at a promotional level with everything that was out there.
A couple of weeks ago, I went up in Harlem. I'd seen these shots in the newsreels about thousands of people jamming the streets around Frank Shifton's Apollo Theater, all trying to get in to see Dr. Jive's rhythm and roll, rhythm and color, rhythm and blues. So here is Dr. Jive. I want you to meet this young disc jockey from WWRL. Now, Doctor, you tell him about it, will you?
And so I think essentially that foundation that was set by those brothers that I just mentioned, including then someone like Magnificent Montague, including someone like Jocko Henderson, who are coming along this timeline, approaching late 50s and going into early 60s, they begin to begin to present the DJ as performer, as when we say personality, not just personality, personality performance. And as they stretch the parameters even further, i.e. Jocko with the Rocket Ship Show and the whole rhythmic pattern that Jocko was able to create.
And way up here in the stratosphere, got to holler mighty loud and clear. E to the R. Ho, this is Jocko, back on the scene with the record machine saying goodbye. Today we're on our way.
I think essentially these personalities, which evolve and lead up to someone like Frankie Crocker in New York, and then you could go to Chicago where you'd have Daddy O'Daly or Herb the Cool Gent Kent and so forth. I mean, literally every city had its radio personality, and that this was now something that ultimately was what gave a station its identity.
It seemed as though black radio was developing on its own energy, since very few dollars were being spent to support the growth of this new industry, even though black radio was quietly creating a black entertainment industry. Now we asked some folks how important was black radio in those early days.
Radio was very important because half of these acts, and we're talking about R&B radio now, right? We're not talking about rock, we're not talking about gospel. Half of these acts would have never been known or heard from had it not been for R&B radio. Now, I'm not talking about super duper stations. I'm talking about regular little black R&B radio. VON in Chicago, DAS in Philly, RL in New York, that radio station.
Radio played a critical role in the black community. Let's just take a mid-range period, say the 60s. That was a period where black consciousness and black revolution and black change was a part of what was happening in society. Black radio emerged as a primary tool for change.
Black radio was at the center of what writer Nelson George called the rhythm and blues world. There were black-owned record companies, black concert promoters, independent black record promoters, black-owned nightclubs like the 20 Grand and Baker's Key Lounge in Detroit and Sylvia's Blue Morocco in the Bronx, New York. There were key black-owned record stores like Hudson's Embassies in St. Louis, Eddie Three-Way in New Orleans, the very significant Lena Brothers in Chicago, and the legendary Birdell's Records in Brooklyn, New York. The glory days, when in spite of various social, political, and economic contradictions, everyone still seemed to prosper.
We were a record store that was a ticket outlet, and we sold tickets. And so anybody that, the promoters of the tickets would always say you get tickets at Birdell's Record Shop, 540 Nostrand Avenue, to get your tickets in. So that's how we got to be big by the name of selling tickets from the different promoters. And we carried all type of tickets, the gospel tickets, the R&B tickets. And during those days, it was like they was doing a show every month or every 2 weeks. So you was steady, we was real active with those shows. And selling tickets was one of our big forte that kept us going during those days. Along with the music, because those days when people heard something, and radio was an instrumental in selling music for us as independent record shops during that day. I remember when they used to call us mom and pops, and then we educated ourselves to independent retail, independent record shop. And those days, it was like a family. People heard you all on the radio. They would come in and purchase the record, and we play it on the speaker. They would come from the outside, and they would listen to the music from the outside, and they come in, what did you playing? Give me that record.
Black radio made a black music industry possible, playing music that white stations most often ignored. In fact, had it not been for black radio, how many legendary stars would perhaps never have had a career?
Tons of them. Tons of them. I mean, you start at the top of the alphabet, bring it on down. Where else would they have gotten the exposure? You know what I mean? Aside from the groups coming along later, like the Earth, Wind, and Fires with that type of thing, which was late pops. I'm not talking about Motown. Motown was never R&B later. But the Stax Vote people, Sam and Dave, Isaac Hayes, would never happen. They would never been known. It wouldn't have happened. Because you had to have exposure. You had to have some place to play those records. They weren't going to get played on WNEW. They weren't going to get Rick Shaw. Shaw wasn't going to play them on ABC. He didn't play them when they got big. So it had to be the RLs, the LIBs, Jack Walker, knock on wood for him, you know, that took the Sam Cooks and all these people from the big labels, RCA, right there, busted right into the community. From there, it became just like, you know, hey, this is good. It's worldwide. But it couldn't be worldwide without that little station. That's where it started.
Well, actually, I believe that any artist, any black artist, who eventually became a pop artist, started at black radio. There was no place else for them to start. It's not like a record company would put out a record on a black artist and take it immediately to pop radio. That didn't happen. Maybe once in a while with people like The Fifth Dimension or, you know, eventually Diana Ross. But in the beginning of all of their careers, you know, whether they were Motown, Columbia, whatever company it was, they all had to start at black radio because they were black people, and you needed a certain amount of a certain amount of sales points in order to get on the radio. You know, so it wasn't a situation where artists became really popular and really famous because they eventually got to pop radio. It was, you had black radio or you didn't get radio.
For black artists, the importance of airplay went well beyond American soul and rhythm and blues. For black artists, a lack of black radio would have global implications.
The majority of reggae artists we don't even know about. The majority, for reggae music on the international setting, most listeners know just about Bob Marley, just about Peter Tosh, and one or two other artists. What even happened in the 70s was that the music industry decided that they wanted to merge white artists into reggae. And so the white players of reggae became more popular than the actual originators of reggae. This created great frustration for many of those artists in Jamaica who were looking for international markets. Even when you look at the top, the Billboard 100, you know, you will see that you have a scant number of reggae artists in the 70s and 80s on those charts, or in the 70s on those charts, and you have a lot of rock and roll artists that are crossing over into reggae, almost kind of what Del Jones would call banditing our tradition.
Even though money was being made and careers were being launched, as well as independent record companies beginning to emerge, it seemed that there was enough to go around. But at the same time, there was the relentless effort to contain and control this powerful and creative force. There was what came to be known as the Chitlin Circuit, extremely abusive and exploitative practices that set out to contain the lives and careers of black disc jockeys and in particular black performers. Money was always the issue.
Two sets of books. There's one book and it might even be three sets of books, because you had to always have a book for the IRS. You weren't going to be totally forthcoming with the IRS. You had the real books that you had stashed away somewhere in a vault that nobody could see, and you had a set of books for the artists. I remember, and I might have related to you, my late friend J.R. Bailey, great songwriter, producer, when he was with the Cadillacs. And they had a record called Peekaboo, which was the biggest hit they had since Speedo, some 3-4 years earlier. And they were on the Chitlin Circuit. They were playing the Uptown in Philadelphia and the Howard in Washington. They were about to come home, and they couldn't wait to get to the offices of Jubilee Records, because JR said, man, I promised my mama I was going to buy her a house, and I'm going to get my royalties, going to buy a house. So they went in to see Jerry Blaine of Jubilee Josie Records, because on the strength of Peekaboo, I mean, they played American Bandstand. And he said, what? You want what? Wait a minute. Let me go check. So he pulled out that set of books and said, okay. By the way, you owe me $30,000. Where's my money? Because the artists didn't understand, and they would charge for everything. They would charge for every China marker in the studio, every razor blade, every splicing tape, the actual recording, the raw tape, promotion. When you went and got your picture taken with James J. Kriegsman, you paid for that. You paid for all of the promotion people when they went out on the road, and the gasoline. Artists didn't understand that. So when it came time for an accounting, you wound up owing the company money.
Yes, they was exploited because we didn't have no idea what a fair pay was. But who was taking advantage of you was these little independent record guys who had these record companies, who was making you sign your songs away as being for hire, and they was taking all the things, as we now know, publishing, and putting it in publishing companies. I'm talking about the Chappells, the Warner Brothers, and these big record companies was just robbing these children because we was innocent. We had no idea about it. Which one of us could read a contract? But when I really got hip to it, he told me, Claudia, you're going on the road. They're calling for you everywhere, man. You're going to be a big star. So we was in Pensacola, Florida. It was a Navy camp there, a Navy dock, whatever you call it. And that night, it was the biggest crowd I'd ever seen, you know, because there was no roof. It was half open because it was Florida, hot. You could not move in there. I would estimate now, it must have been 1,200 people in there. And there must have been that many outside trying to get in. So his son was a roadie. So he came to the dressing room when I did the show. He said, man, we got to do another show. There's a whole lot of people out there. Now, I'm looking for my $100 a night. You know what I mean? He said, you want to do another show? I'm happy. I'm happy. I'm young. I'm ready to go. I said, yeah, where's Gerald? He said, I can't find Gerald. I will give you the same money for that, for another show you did for that one. He said, I'll give you $750. I said, what? I'll give you $750 to do another show. Right there, when I heard it, I said, $750? Yeah, that's the money you got. Where's Gerald? I just paid him. I was getting 100. So, man, I just couldn't keep that. You know what I mean? He gave me the money, so I took it. You know what I mean? So Frank Paglia, when we got back to New Orleans, he was asking me about the money. And I said, well, Frank, why am I getting 100 when they're paying me $750? He said, I'm paying for the band. I'm paying for the gas. And I knew they was getting, each musician, there were 7 musicians, they was getting $25 a piece, something like that. And gas was 17 cents a gallon. So that's when I said, you know what? I quit. And Frank Schiffman called me because he did have me booked out to Apollo. And he said, man, everybody calling you, got to come do this show. I said, I'm not doing no shows. I don't know anything about this. I'm going back to the airport. He said, you can't go back to the airport. He had Don Roby to call me from Houston, Texas, who was another. He had the only black record company in the business, but that was gospel. He had Duke and Peacock. He flew to New Orleans to see if I would go back to work. He convinced me that I should go to the Apollo Theater because he said all black artists got to work the Apollo Theater. Frank Schiffman, I talked to him myself. He said, I'll give you $1,750 a week. But he didn't tell me that required 35 shows. You know, once you figure out this stuff and understand what it is that you're doing and the monies that you're making for these folk, and you getting the short end of the stick. The artist always got the short end of the stick. He never was in front of the check.
At the center of it all was Black Radio and the performances of the remarkable personalities who were on the air.
As we recompute the rock of all ages with Redbone. Come on and get your love. 10:02 with Bobby J. It's 3:29 with Terry Bledsoe from the home of the original Touchstones. Stand by, Brown Crowd. Your chance to win may be only moments away.
Do it, Frankie. Do it to it.
Suck it to me, mama. Say, baby, this is an album that's bound to put more dips in your hips, more cut in your strut, and more glide in your stride. If you don't...
Radio back then was the personalities. Each personality had its own individual personality. And believe it or not, when we were at Hank Spann's memorial, it hit me like a ton of bricks. The personalities sold out records. The personalities made us listen to the station. You know, you would come home at a certain time in the afternoon to catch the evening drive or the morning drive, or you would make sure you heard the lunchtime, the drive during lunch hour. But you had your own personality or DJ that you wanted to hear, and they sold a record for you. If Bob Law, spoke good about my record, or he played it and he talked in it, wow. The same thing like Hank did. You all made the record. We sang it and we put out all our efforts in it, but just that little touch that you guys gave the personalities, the different personalities of the DJs at all the stations, they gave it the push. They really sold our record.
Disc jockeys were pivotal points because there was nothing to look at that time. There was no video comparison. So disc jockeys had information. It was one of those things, if you got close enough to the disc jockey to give them the information and to get them to hang out with various performers, they could bring the reality of the performer to the public.
It's 7:01. This is Hank's Plan, where that Super 16 touchstone goes off 4 times in this 52-minute music hour. But right now, the sun's about to set. Come on, double hypnotists, let's see how funky we can get. Rufus, Chaka Khan, let's go to work. Once you get started.
Now, record companies were so grateful for the reach and influence of disc jockeys that they used their industry influence to keep them happy. Important jocks like E. Rodney Jones of Chicago, Frankie Crocker of New York, and Soul Train's Don Cornelius even found themselves rewarded with movie roles.
This is just a token of our appreciation, compliments of the boss, the man who pays all the bills, your man, my man, everybody's man, Mr. Doodlebug Thimpkins.
That's right.
One more time, ladies and gentlemen, for Miss Tiffany. Don't forget opening next week, the Frankie Crocker All-Girl Review. Hey, and once again, for your dancing pleasure, we present Kendricks and Company.
Hey, hold it. Hey, look here, I want you to be here next week because I got a show that's bound to put more dips in your hips, more cut in your strut, and more glide in your stride. If you don't dig it, you know you got a hole in your soul.
Great session, baby. Out of sight.
Well, it's always a pleasure to have E. Rodney Jones, the greatest disc jockey in the world, in Los Angeles.
Anytime.
Thank you, brother.
The audience loved every minute of it. Black radio was growing and developing and becoming the most powerful and influential voice in the black community, and perhaps one of the truly significant voices in the entire city.
My memory would have to be how black radio was able to put a black mayor in New York City a few years ago. At that time, black DJs went on radio and talked about Mayor David N. Dinkins being the person that should be the mayor of New York. And I can say without any hesitation that it was black radio that made it possible for David Dinkins to become mayor.
WWRL, that's all I can say. Top 10, sometimes top 5, competing with WABC and WMCA. It was, albeit a black radio station, it was a general market station. We had a large white listenership.
And recognizing its emerging power, the black entertainment industry would begin to organize in an effort to avoid being marginalized and denied a full share of the wealth they felt entitled to.
Those days you had EJ Corvettes, you had A&S, and you had a couple of other stores that was bigger than we were, and we couldn't compete in pricing. So I felt as though it was a need for independent retailers to come together where we could buy in volume to meet the consumer's price. The consumer, when he come in, we would be able to give him a price, and he wouldn't have to go to EJ Corvettes or Macy's or Mays or someone to pick up those records. And it was very successful by doing that too, because we had like 15 to 25 stores in our organization.
The Black Music Association was first born out of a crisis which took the form of the payola investigations that occurred in Newark in, I believe, the 70s. But it revealed that the players, that is radio personalities, artists, blacks involved in the business of music, had no forum through which to exert influence. They had no lobbying mechanism. So the realization of that gave rise to the formation of the Black Music Association. But that vision was to transform the status of black people in an industry where they were disproportionate in terms of creative input and also disproportionate in terms of being recipients of the benefits of the industry.
I think that in order to understand the Fair Play Committee, you have to also understand the times that we were in. We're talking about a time in which black people were in a rebellious mood throughout the United States, in fact, worldwide. And we're talking about a time in which the operative slogan for black people was Black Power for Black People. And out of that political and social and cultural consciousness, the Fair Play Committee was formed as a result of the abuses and problems and lack of power and structure in both the entertainment industry, the recording industry, and the radio industry. During that period of time, the predominant wealth that was developed in those three areas, radio, entertainment, and recording, was developed by black people. Black artists, black musicians, black writers, but the control of the product, of the marketing, of the sales, and ultimately of the profits were in the hands of non-black people. Within that realm, we see the development of this group who call themselves the Fair Play Committee.
At the same time, the black community was beginning to understand the reach and influence of the local radio station, and radio became a significant lifeline for black communities everywhere.
Oh no, it's no question. I mean that's, if you go to, from when I used to go to Haiti initially, people used to laugh because I would go to Radio Shack and I would take sometimes 10 or 15 AM FM radios, because when you took the AM FM radios, they have low power radio stations. In fact, we do this work up north in a place called Milo, and one time I was there, and they had the antenna hooked up to a battery, a car battery. But it had a radius of whatever it was, 5 miles or whatever. And some of the stations, reached throughout, the whole country. But here are people who are largely 60% probably illiterate, but who are politically very astute. In fact, I tell my students here at York College that. I mean, it's amazing because they're not reading, but they're listening and they're hearing.
There was something magical about radio. As stated earlier, owners of black stations did not invest in the product, insisting instead that disc jockeys struggled with outdated and inadequate equipment. But the magic was there nonetheless. We called it the theater of the mind. When the jock turned on the mic, he made us understand the African concept that through the word, man has mastery over all things.
Now, we used to talk about the theater of your mind.
Mm-hmm.
There's the feeling that there's something magical about radio.
Oh.
That makes you able to strike a responsive chord, but I don't know if anybody has ever put in words what it was that was magical about radio.
The whole idea of sitting in a room and operating on a vibration. The whole idea that I can be in one place and you can be in another, and that you can actually hear me from where I am, and how that happened was somewhat magical. I mean, at least to me. And I always respected that and appreciated it. Because if I'm here in this radio station and you're in your bathroom or in your living room or in your bed, I'm imagining where you are. If you're in your car, if you're walking down the street, and I'm wanting to talk to you wherever you are. Because I know where I am. I'm in the studio. And, to me, if I was on the radio, I wanted you to listen to me. Mm-hmm. I wanted you to hear what I had to say. I wanted you to know that I was talking to you, Mm-hmm. So it was kind of magical.
Now, in that same context, the audience then used to really relate to the radio station, like you say, like it was the audience was more than an audience. It was more like a family.
It was a family and a community. So you belong to that radio station, you belong to that community. It was somewhere to go, somewhere to turn to, someone to meet up with. You know, what station are you? I listen to the radio station you listen to was part of your identity. And I mean, there was a time when you come home, you turned on the light and then you turned on the radio. It was automatic. That's just what you do. It was just part of you.
The dial was already set.
The dial was set. Bam, there you go.
Black radio's power was in its ability to reflect the very spirit and character of the black community. Somehow, the radio was something more than a little box that you listened to.
WBLS New York, Stereo in Black, where you hear Carmen McRae, Charles McMelvin, and modern jazz for Gene Allen, Ron Carter, Herbie Hunt, Richie Hayes, Duke Ellington, Little Richard, O.C. Stokely Carmichael, Gladys Knight, Ray Charles, Pacheco, Smokey Robbins, Lee Morgan, Mahalia Jackson, Johnny Clark, Curtis, and Aretha Franklin. All happening now on Stereo in Black. WBLS, the total black experience inside. 107.5 in stereo.
Radio in particular, I just have memories of always saying, turn up the radio, turn up the radio. And when we would go outside and play, we would open up the windows and we would turn the radio up as loud as it could go because we didn't have boombox back then. And so we needed the music because not only the music itself, which kept us going, it was our lifeline, you know, it's a part of our culture. But also the news, the information that we got on black radio and the radio personalities of yesteryear were like our brothers and sisters. We felt like we knew them. They felt like family to us. They spoke in a language that we all understood, and they played the music we needed to hear.
To be in black radio, or the black entertainment industry, was not simply to have a job. It was more like a lifestyle. It was like belonging to an exclusive fraternity.
Yes, it was. It was a new lifestyle, particularly in New York. Everything is different in New York. It's a party city. It's a 24-hour city, always has been. Things happen here that don't happen in the rest of the country. I don't know that my counterparts in like Memphis or Atlanta at that time were having the same kind of lifestyle changes as we were. Very often you would take disc jockeys to parties. You would accompany them to parties, and then, you know, if you got to a good enough rapport with them, they would start taking you to parties. And the other thing that I remember was that all of us who were in promotion and marketing at that time was a close, tight-knit crew. We all did everything and supported each other.
It was a fraternity. You were in a unique fraternity. It was a situation. This is what I meant when I said that I learned how to work in this environment. It wasn't like working at the factory, because I had done that, and it wasn't working at Macy's, being a salesman on the floor. You had to carry yourself a certain way, and you had to be about what you really said you were about.
The literature of the Black Arts Movement pointed out that the key was in the music. As the black consciousness movement was growing and developing in the late 50s and early 60s, the black masses were not reading James Baldwin, Lorraine Hansberry, Richard Wright, Langston Hughes, and the other powerful writers of the era. They had not yet discovered the fiery young poets and writers of the Black Power movement, but they were listening to the radio. In fact, at that point, the music was the literature of the masses. As poet Professor Larry Neal once pointed out, our music has always been the most dominant manifestation of what we are and how we feel. It was the music and the personalities on the radio that were moving us closer to the forces and ideas motivating Black America.
You know, James Brown said, "I'm black and I'm proud," and that put the official stamp on the entire Black Power movement.
Say it loud! Let me hear you! Say it loud! Say it loud! Say it loud!
Sure.
because the music was more socially relevant then. You know, you had the songs from the Staple Singers, Respect Yourself, the Sly songs, you had Joe Quarterman, Free Soul, and God knows all the songs that James Brown made. Yeah, they would get up on a good foot and a popcorn, but there was some social relevance in those songs, and the announcers at the time, whether you thought they were not, they were locking in with those songs and talking about what was happening in the community.
Tell me a little bit about that. What was that like?
Wow. When I was on the radio, and personality had a great effect on the audience, it was a time when music was personal, and the sound of music was personal, and the moods of music was personal. And the disc jockey had the rare opportunity of setting the pace and setting the mood, so that if you came in to the radio station that day and you happened to be feeling particularly sunny, then you might want to play some particularly sunny, happy, and up-tempo music. Now, if that day you were thoughtful or mindful, you might want to go over and slide over to Billie Holiday or Sarah Vaughan, or play something that set a different kind of mood. And people began to respect and appreciate what the music could do to set a mood. So your personality was sort of set inside of what the music could say. Now you might want to have a conversation with somebody through music. So you would select that music that would say to that person how you felt about them.
Like, for instance, Shining Star. The first time I heard Shining Star, honey, you are my shining star, the hook caught me because I knew it was a simple melody that everybody can sing, that anyone could sing. And then when I heard the verse, you know, so many have tried to find a love like yours and mine. You know, the lyric, it expressed itself immediately in the first verse. And I usually look for to be caught by the hook and the first verse.
Now, just as music was lifting people worldwide, supporting the peace movement, encouraging racial tolerance, exalting love, not lust, on black radio, the music began to change. Lyrics like Black Pearl, Precious Little Girl, were replaced with lyrics that seemed to hate as well as to denigrate women.
Yeah, I agree that a lot of the lyrics are attacking women. As a woman, as a mom, I take offense to a lot of the lyrics. I think that anything taken to an extreme is error. I've heard my pastor say that a lot of times, and I think that hip-hop and R&B has gone to a very damaging extreme when it comes to women. You know, there's all these different phrases on how a woman can please a man and what they're going to do to them sexually, and it's very objectifying, very misogynistic. And I'm really sensitive to that as a mother because I have a teenage daughter. And I never tell my daughter don't listen to music, because when I was a kid, I would be under the covers listening to my radio. There's no way you could tell me not to listen to music. But what I did with her is I would listen to a song and we would dissect the lyrics. And I would ask her, how does that make you feel about that artist, that this artist is talking about women in this way? So I made her sensitive to what she was hearing. Music is so powerful, you know, it really motivates you. Like, you can hear a certain song, it can make you drive fast, it can make you cry, it can make you laugh, you could be depressed and hear a song and it can uplift you. And I think that artists need to understand, you know, especially if your music is geared towards young people and they're still forming and figuring out who they are. And a lot of young people suffer from low self-esteem and confusion, and a lot of girls I know listen to this music and they begin to think this is their value, this is their worth, their body, this is what they have to offer a man and society that makes them special.
Today's music programmers say that they are only giving the audience what the research says the audience wants. The record company only brings them thug music, so that's what they play. The record company says that's the only thing radio is willing to play.
I do believe that record companies are in the business of making money, of course, and it's easier to go with a model that has already been established, you know. So if misogynistic, violent sexually promiscuous videos and music is what sells, they don't care. That's what they're going to put out, you know. As artists, I know there's a lot of artists out there that have good things to say and great music that don't get heard, so there probably is a resistance. But I like to put the responsibility on us, you know, as Black people. We complain about programming, what we see on TV, what we hear on the radio, but who's listening? Who's watching? They're only responding to what we watch. You know, I say, if you don't like it, turn it off, you know, because when you turn it off, something different has to happen. Who's responsible? I don't know. But as an artist myself, I feel like I have a responsibility. I wasn't perfect as an artist. I didn't always put out, you know, the greatest music. When I was a child, I thought like a child, became an adult. I take responsibility now for my message. But I think it just becomes a point in an artist's life where they have to not sell out. You know, a lot of these artists are making music about living in a certain area and being involved in certain criminal activity, and they don't really even know anything about that. They're not even living that life. They're just doing that to sell records.
It does seem that there are factors other than talent affecting airplay. Nowadays, being a truly gifted artist is insufficient. You can be too dark, too heavy, among other things.
They tell us it's not in their genre, or they'll say we are too old.
If you don't have the look, you don't have to bother to put out a record. And I guess it's not a record, you don't have to bother to put out a CD, I should have said. I think that the look has become so important that it dwarfs the actual quality of the music.
The artists, the musicians, the creators of the music have always seemed to understand that inherent in the music was a transforming power. The music had the ability to take people from one level of consciousness to another. For instance, the anti-war movement was really launched by the young Black activists in SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Black students were the first to say, "Hell no, we won't go." But the message did not resonate with the masses of blacks in the street until artists like Edwin Starr and Marvin Gaye challenged the notion of war.
For Black people and for African people, you know, our music, going back to antiquity, has a different function than other people's tradition. You know, this whole idea of art for art's sake in European culture has no place in African culture. That when an African sings a song or plays a rhythm, it has a function that brings cohesiveness to the village. And this is the tradition that we carry even through slavery. This is the tradition that even sustained us, sustained our souls, sustained our spirits, and even sustained a vision of redemption in our community through slavery. And, you know, this is very much a struggle that the masters on the plantation knew. And so we are quite we're quite knowledgeable of the commonly referred to law in America that banned drums from even being made and played, that Africans could lose limbs for playing drums. And it was because of the social vibrancy, that talking drum, that healing drum.
And we have always known the power of music in the Black culture. And I have always felt that we sang ourselves out of being enslaved Africans. We sang ourselves out of it. People think Lincoln freed us. We freed ourselves, I believe. We were free before Emancipation Proclamation. And I say that because we had this music called Negro Spirituals. And we didn't believe and we didn't accept that we were going to be enslaved for the rest of our lives. We sang, ain't gonna be a slave, ain't gonna be a slave. We sang about that. We sang about things being better days. The Negro Spirituals all show you how we weren't going for it. And so the power of that music, we sang about it, we felt it, we believed it, and I believe we helped manifest a new life for ourselves. Because if you talk about something or sing about something or be about something long enough, it's going to change your whole existence.
the power and value of black music did not go unnoticed. It was 1972 when Harvard University released a report called A Study of the Soul Music Environment, the infamous Harvard Report.
Harvard Report was an interesting report that was produced by the Harvard Business School presented to Columbia Records on May 11th, 1972. And the Harvard Report was a report that was given to Columbia as an examination of the nature of the soul music market. Harvard University commissioned a couple of their scholars to research the black music, radio stations, black record companies, and examine the economic solvency of the market to see, how much money was being produced in the market. And ultimately, the study was given to Columbia Records for the effect of Columbia infiltrating the black music market in a certain way.
I think that the Harvard Report, it probably has several different levels. I think the first critical level that it represents is a market overview of black music from a perspective of total exploitation. I don't say that with a degree necessarily of negativism, because essentially black music is a part of a kind of commercial realm, commerce. So that essentially what they saw was, in the Harvard Report, and what they presented was a clear level of exploitation of black culture, and essentially how to own it.
African Americans, we were told, were at the threshold to equality and prosperity, and as such, a kind of cultural conformity was to be the blueprint for the future. Black radio was no different. To truly prosper and gain acceptance in corporate America, our blackness would need to be modified. Even the word black would segue into urban.
My particular point of view, the way I kind of felt about it, was that this is something new for me. I came from a basic technical background, so I really didn't know how to be a personality. I needed help there. I felt that I could do it, but I didn't really know. I saw the way it used to be, black radio and now urban radio. And then on the other hand, I did know that we were trying to get major market radio dollars through advertisement, promotion, and publicity and advertising. So I knew that the radio station, in order to pay my salary and the rent that we had down in Midtown, 2nd Avenue, 42nd Street, we needed to make money. We needed to have part of the major market dollars. We had to go to major advertising agencies and convince them that we were reaching the people. In fact, at WBLS, we had a campaign that said, "Don't buy us because we're black, buy us because we reach the people." It was a campaign only in the advertising world. It didn't go to the street. So how did I feel about it? I felt good about it. I thought it was something new. I didn't want to be left out in case it proved to be something. And stack that up against what I didn't know at the time how to do, and that is to be a radio personality and work with an urban mindset, so to speak. So I went with it.
But for others, the term urban felt like something even more sinister was beginning to happen, affecting the entire industry as well as the larger community.
Well, I'm not as conversant about the format stuff as, some of the program people like yourself who know the programming. All I know is that it seemed like something else. I mean, it seemed like all of a sudden the depoliticization was taking place. Because again, I'm locked into the Jesse Jackson era and the civil rights movement, and I know we've moved on beyond that to some extent, but perhaps that's a problem. Because many of the early radio stations seem to have a much stronger commitment to community service, a much stronger commitment to the whole question of community mobilization, of attacking the issues, of working on the issues.
What does urban mean? Does it mean that you have the belief that black folks don't need to hear certain news and information? Is that urban? Because years ago, we had black radio that was relevant to our community. It told you what was happening in the community, not just the pathology, but some of the important things that we need to know to make decisions about our lives. That is gone. Now we hear what I consider to be pablum.
I don't think that any programming decision that takes place in culture, in European culture, is void of politics. I think that all cultural manifestations are political by their intent. And so, you know, clearly the market, the broader music market has been aware of this consistent redeeming quality that has existed in our music. And the redemptive quality of our music is really a quality that's trying to draw us to the strength within ourselves. And you know, the society is not interested in really increasing the strength of a sentence of African slavery. And so the programming decisions to change from black radio to urban, I would say it would have to have had political intent.
Black radio was nonetheless a business. And when black radio was entering its glory days, the full scope of black consumer spending was just beginning to emerge. At that point, blacks were spending $30 million annually. Now, black consumer dollars are being counted into the hundred billions. And black radio was the direct link to that vibrant consumer market, giving black radio a unique power in the corridors of corporate America. If you wanted to reach those black consumer dollars, you would have to come through black media. And at that time, black radio was the most trusted and effective medium to take you into the black community. Black capitalism was being defined as the real black power. And black radio, like black music, like the black community, never seemed to notice that with its changes, it was beginning to lose its unique and compelling power. The National Black Network became the American Urban Radio Network. New York's WBLS went from the total black experience and sound to the world's best-looking sound. Black radio never seemed to understand that it was losing its very reason for existing. However, just as black music radio began to lose its way, black talk radio began to emerge. And very early on, talk radio began to flex some muscle. Without much fanfare, stations like WVON in Chicago, WCHB in Detroit, WHAT AM in Philadelphia, Front Page on LA's KGLH, and WOL AM in the nation's capital began to mobilize black communities. The New York City Police Department even established a black desk to monitor that city's black talk station, WLIB, on a daily basis. One of the first examples of the national influence of my show, Night Talk, broadcast on what was then the National Black Network, was when the Night Talk audience actually contributed the money to save the site of Dr. King's assassination, the Lorraine Motel, from the auction block. With contributions from around the country, the Night Talk audience made it possible for Judge Diarmy Bailey, who was at that time an attorney with the Martin Luther King Memorial Foundation, to be able to buy the motel, which then gave the foundation enough time to raise the money they needed to build the Museum of the Civil Rights Movement that currently stands on the site of the old Lorraine Motel. It was Black Talk Radio that made that museum possible. Night Talk, broadcast in the key black markets around the country, literally launched Jesse Jackson's 1984 presidential campaign and kept Jesse on the front burner until the white press could no longer dismiss his candidacy. It was black radio stations around the country that became the wind under Reverend Jackson's wings.
It was incredible. I mean, in some ways, it mirrored what was happening here in New York because inner city broadcasting was very favorable. And Jesse, it's not as if they just turned their airways over, but Jesse was a creative and innovative candidate. There was something to talk about. There was a sense of pride that this crusade was unfolding. And I was a Southern Regional Coordinator, Deputy Campaign Manager for Jesse Jackson in the South. And I can tell you, as we rolled through the South, you know, you rolled up into a field, Somebody would have a trailer, and that was the radio station, and you'd roll up, you know, with the Jackson Action Rainbow Express or whatever. And you say, we're with the Jesse Jackson campaign. Is there an opportunity to engage your audience? And they would interrupt the programming and put us on the air and have a debate. And then again, in many instances, you had the ability, even if it was a music format, to interrupt the format and engage the audience. And we did that time and time and time again.
Now, the interesting thing about Black Talk Radio is that even with its power and influence in the black community, most whites seemed unaware of us and actually seemed surprised to learn that we were even there. Well, that was until the Million Man March. It was Black Talk Radio, led by Night Talk, that was a key factor in establishing the Million Man March as a viable and credible idea. Now remember, all the major black and white political personalities at that time cautioned black men not to go, as did many prominent black women. But in key cities throughout the nation, Black Talk Radio explained why black men must go.
We thank all of the black newspapers, radio stations, commentators, disc jockeys who really talked up the Million Man March. The mass media did not get involved until the last minute, and it seemed as though they got involved with another agenda in mind.
When it was discovered that Black Talk Radio, operating like a 20th century electronic underground railroad, had been a primary organizing tool for the march, it seemed to signal that all black radio had to be marginalized. And the strategy to eliminate black radio was to simply render it unprofitable.
The money that we spend, over $1 trillion, the profits from us fall to the bottom line that become the advertising budgets for corporate America. Corporate America, the P&Gs, the AT&Ts, the Pepsi-Colas, the Coca-Colas, the Novartis, whatever it is, we buy. And the money that we spend falls to the bottom line, so they then give it to their advertising agency, the 5 families, because now the advertising industry is owned by 5 holding companies, and they take this money, and instead of performing market diligence where you put your money on the top performing media in that market, they take the money and enforce a separate and an equal paradigm for black radio, whereby they would give more money to underperforming white radio stations. For example, in New York, the last diary before Arbitron came out with PPM, KISS FM was ranked number 1. But we got number 11 money, while WPAT or one of the other white stations that might have been ranked 17 or 20 got 4 and 5 money. So black radio stations run around and they deal with Madison Avenue like house Negroes under slavery. They say, "Massa, you so kind. Massa, you so this. Massa, you did so that," while Massa's keeping his foot up there behind in terms of how he allocates the money.
Currently, in the absence of serious daily black talk radio, the conservative right wing uses the media and much of today's white talk radio to demonize President Obama and to attempt to erode his credibility, all without any serious challenge or rebuttal.
What you say makes me remember how I was personally demonized by white radios. There was this racist Jay Diamond and the other arch racist Bob Grant, and they actually had mock executions of me and other folks that belonged to the organization, the Committee to Eliminate Media Offensive to African People. You can almost say that we don't have a black radio response to white talk racist radio, because the powers that be have reduced the hours of black talk to just several a week.
Now, we are told that serious black talk and critical thinking are simply unprofitable for black media in general and black talk radio in particular. The ratings are just not there. In other words, blacks, we are told, are simply not interested in news, information, and meaningful talk of any kind. And like it or not, broadcasters must live or die by the ratings.
We did a show on VH1 that was very positive, and the show didn't continue. And when people talk to me, they say, why didn't the show continue? I loved it. It wasn't that buffoonery. It wasn't this. It was something that I enjoy. And I said, well, you guys didn't show up enough. But when we put on something else, you know, the ratings go up, and you cannot argue with ratings.
Arbitron argues that research experts say that their survey methods are still the most effective, and they assure us they are trying to be fair. Others feel that Arbitron's insistence on their survey methods, particularly the new PPMs, the portable people meters, only serve to protect white privilege and do great harm to black and Latino radio. In fact, on October 10, 2008, the New York State Attorney General Andrew Cuomo filed and won a lawsuit against Arbitron charging false advertising and deceptive business practices that threatened to drive minority broadcasters out of business. The lawsuit accused Arbitron with failing to disclose serious shortcomings in the accuracy of the new system and its inadequate representation of African American and Latinos. In winning the lawsuit, the Attorney General secured a landmark agreement with Arbitron to cure defects that threatened to drive minority broadcasters out of business. The agreement, which is the first of its kind in the nation, requires Arbitron to adopt new standards to cure serious flaws in its new PPM methodology. Now, to date, it is not clear to what extent Arbitron has complied with the conditions of the lawsuit. As stated earlier, some feel that blacks have to educate the whites in the ad industry who are so far removed from the black community that they just don't really know us. But is it really a lack of understanding? Now here's what they do understand. They know we spend $54 billion annually on food. Black radio gets no revenue from the supermarket chains. They know we spend $6.2 billion annually on personal care. Black radio gets no real revenue from the major hair and skincare companies. They know we spend $46.7 billion on cars and trucks. Black radio gets no real ad dollars from the auto manufacturers or their local dealerships. They know we spend $22.9 billion on clothing. And black radio gets little or no ad revenue from the major clothing chains like The Gap, Sears, JCPenney, Old Navy, and such. Black radio reaches these multi-billion-dollar consumers on a daily basis, but the ad industry refuses to acknowledge that fact. It was Nat King Cole, responding to the ad industry's refusal to sponsor his excellent 1950s TV show, who said that Madison Avenue was afraid of the dark. And many feel that Madison Avenue is still afraid and has made insufficient progress since the 1950s.
I think that black radio proves that the American dream of meritocracy and performance only applies to white people. Black radio is the most efficient medium in America, yet it holds and receives niggardly sums for the audience that it delivers to America's corporations and the products they sell.
Black owners unwittingly protect this racism when they act as though the audience is not supportive and change the format, as though it was the format instead of Arbitron's flawed system that was in fact the real problem. Black radio, like the black community, is the target of an organized, systematic attack to destroy it. Consider this. Black radio is a unique institution. It rivals the church in terms of influence in the black community. And as such, black radio influenced more than just record sales. And perhaps that is precisely why it had to be destroyed. Or is it really that easy to destroy such an awesome force? Can black radio ever regain its former prominence and influence?
Wow. I think that radio would have to revert back to some of the things that it did when it was prominent before. And that is to strike a responsive chord inside of the community where people really are. And it may mean now that the radio station will have to come to you, whereas we used to go to it. And what I mean by that is that the radio personalities may need to be more visible inside of the community. It may need to be more visible inside of the not-for-profits, inside of the churches, inside of where people congregate, so that there becomes more of a connection. I think the connection was kind of lost when radio station became somewhat impersonal and robotic.
To start, just like other ethnic groups have begun to do in this 21st century, black media will have to demand to be respected for what it actually is. To be black can no longer be considered a disadvantage. And there is also a political posture that is going to be necessary.
It is not about media selection or clients not dealing or understanding the nuances of the black market or the nuances of urban radio. It is categorically illegal. It is in violation of Sherman antitrust law. It is under the statutes that deal with restraint of trade, minority discounts, equal price fixing, and collusion. So my point is Madison Avenue will continue to treat us like, I know I can't say this word, but Negroes, until we stand up, not only the consumer, but black talk show hosts, and black owners, and black general managers and stuff, and they have to step up to the table and file a lawsuit against the illegal, restraint of trade practices that Madison Avenue enforces on them. The same way the Dred Scott decision and the Fugitive Slave Act made us, no matter where we went, what we did, we were susceptible to being recalled violently back into slavery. Well, the same condition is for black radio right now. No matter what they do, no matter how high their rankings, no matter what percentage of the city population is black, Madison Avenue has the ability to call you back in. I call them the men in the gray flannel sheets, okay, because they need to take them hoods off, because there's no difference between them and their ratings and how they allocate money than the night riders that burned the cross. So here we've got black radio afraid to confront them, afraid to say anything. And until black radio does, they will always be treated niggardly.
Poet laureate Langston Hughes once pointed out that there is so much richness in black humor, so much beauty in black dreams, so much dignity in our struggle, and so much universality in our issues, in each living human being of color, that he did not understand the tendency that some black artists of his day had of seeking to run away from themselves. Perhaps Langston Hughes points the way in this day. Black radio begins to regain its power when it no longer runs from its own blackness.
WWRL, New York. It's midnight. I'm Gary Burr, the GBE, where Super 16 is all you need to know to win. Well, as the city closes its eyes, you can take off your disguise. I like to say that because I know most people in the city have so very much to hide. How you living? Just enough of the city, huh? Tell you what, in the words of a bird song, let's chase the evil spirits away and say hello to a brand new day in the experience.
You might wake up some morning to the sound of someone sucking soul from 6 to 10. And if the sleep has left your ears, you may perceive a certain kind of bright and happy fellow. Do be concerned, for it'll be me, the Dixie Drifter.
Hello to you, hello to you. Come join our company over WLIB. This is the house that Jack built.
Sweet Charlie, baby, says Jackie Moore on a, what's this they call a Valentine's Day? I'm gonna call this a double dose day. My wife Teresa had a set of twin boys last night, man, let me tell you. When I say I want my boy, I get some.
And a very pleasant good morning to you and yours on this cloudy, rainy Friday morning.
My name is Rocky Grosse, and welcome to Rocky's Place.